What's going on, college basketball fans, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Danny Hoops podcast. I'm happy we made it this far. We're going to keep coming with the podcast every single Thursday night, all the way throughout the season, and continue it throughout the off season as well, as long as you guys keep enjoying them. We got some good stuff to talk about here today. Here's what the lineup is looking like for the podcast. So we got some news to cover. We got a big time player already entering the transfer portal, and we're only not even 2 months into the season. So some crazy news there. We also got two big headlines involving some Power 6 head coaches. I'm sure one of them you guys have already heard about, maybe both of them, but we're going to talk about a little bit on here. And then I want to talk about some underrated players, some guys that are really performing super well this season and aren't really getting the recognition that they deserve. And then we are going to be talking about who I think is the best conference in college basketball at this point in the season. We're going to talk about a lot of the teams in the Power 6 conferences, how they stack up against each other, and which conference I believe right now is the best. And then, as always, at the end of the podcast, I'm going to give you guys my top 5 player of the year candidates and my top 3 national championship contenders. And I will be taking your guys' questions at the end. And before we get started with all of that, I just want to give you guys a heads up on what's coming up on the YouTube channel here soon. Tomorrow, we are going to have winner and score predictions for all the big games on Saturday. There are so many good games. Tomorrow morning, we should have out our winner and score predictions in a video, so be on the lookout for that. Also, Saturday night, around 10 p.m. as well, we are going to be live for a watch party for Tennessee versus Arizona. We're going to be watching that and also talking about recapping all the crazy games that are going to happen on that Saturday. So recap stream and also watch party for Tennessee, Arizona coming on Saturday night. So let's get into the news that has been breaking out this week. First, let's talk about these two coaching news situations because they're both kind of like kind of a big deal. The first one involves Xavier's head coach, Sean Miller. In 2018, there was a big ordeal about some wire testing that went on there at Arizona when Sean Miller was at Arizona about him potentially paying DeAndre Ayton to come play for him at Arizona. And pretty much he got away with it and he has no sanctions to him. They just don't have enough evidence towards Sean Miller himself, although some of his former assistants there at Arizona did get some sanctions. So there was some guilt to him, but the way that Sean Miller got slandered back in 2018 and really throughout the years, I really think it is kind of horrible because we don't really see people slandering some of these other head coaches that have done things, just as bad or maybe even worse. And I just don't think Sean Miller deserved all this, all the slander that he got. So ultimately, he gets no sanctions. He's good to coach there at Xavier, and it's a good thing for him because he's got a really solid team there, and they might be the second best team in the Big East, just behind UConn. So be on the lookout there for the Musketeers. And the next coaching one, I'm sure you guys have all heard. I made a video about this, and Chris Beard charged with assault and not looking good at this point. I just kind of wanted to briefly talk about this a little bit more. We all know what he did for Texas Tech. He brought them to a national championship, and even before that at Arkansas Little Rock, he won a tournament game there with them. And yeah, it's not looking good for Chris Beard. I would be very, very surprised if he was able to come out of this with his job still at Texas. I'm sure that he's going to get fired. And then I'm sure probably a couple of years down the road, another team is going to hire him as head coach, as a lot of people will start to forget about the Chris Beard situation, and another team will hire him who is desperate for a new head coach because he is a good head coach, but still, just what he did, horrible, not looking good for him. But the other big piece of news, and the last piece of news that we have here before we get into our other parts of the podcast, we have a transfer already at this point in the season. We're not even to Christmas, and it's only December, and we already have a big name player already entering the transfer portal, and that is Fardaws Aimaq from Texas Tech. And he has not played yet this year, but last season for Utah Valley, he did average 18 points per game, 13 rebounds per game, and shot 43% from behind the three-point line as a center. Those are very impressive numbers. He has not played yet this year because he had a broken foot. He was expected back around February, but the main thing that I've been seeing through a few different sources was that the main reason he is entering the transfer portal is because he's feeling like he might be getting rushed back onto the court way too early by Texas Tech, and he doesn't want rushed back. He would rather enter the transfer portal and probably sit this whole season out, go somewhere else next year, and be 100% healthy. So that's what it's looking like at this point. But a big name already in the portal for someone to go out there and grab next season. But let's get into the next portion of this podcast. And this is where I want to give a quick shout out to some of the underrated players so far this season. And of course, we're not going to get to every underrated player in college basketball because there are a lot. But these guys specifically deserve some recognition. And the first name is also, we talked about their coach earlier, from Xavier, Solly Boom. This guy is a beast, and his performance so far throughout this year is really how I came up with this topic because he is so underrated. I don't see Solly Boom getting any recognition really, but he's really helping lead that Xavier team. And I know they got some other guys like Jack Nungy and Colby Jones there, but Solly is really the best player on that team. He's averaging 17 points per game, 3 assists, and 4 rebounds a game. And he's shooting. Listen to these shooting splits by Solly Boom. 53% from the field, 51% from behind the arc, and 86% from the free throw line. I mean, that is insane. He's shooting 50, 50, 85 shooting splits, crazy numbers. And I think Xavier, with Creighton's struggles at this point in the season, I think Xavier might be the second best team in the Big East. You could also throw Marquette in there. They're somewhere close, but right now I got to give the edge here to Xavier. Another underrated player staying in the Big East Conference from Marquette, we have sophomore Cam Jones. I don't see many people talking about Cam Jones, but this guy is a stud. He's averaging 16, 4, and 2, and he you can tell he is the primary scorer there for Marquette, and he's a great defender as well. I really like what the sophomore there for Marquette has been doing this season. Another guy who has been lighting up the statistics for a really good team in Arkansas, but I'm not seeing get that much recognition. Maybe it's because the freshmen coming in are kind of stealing the headlines there in Fayetteville. But how about Ricky Council the fourth? He has been lighting it up, averaging 19 points per game, being a big-time part of that Arkansas team. And now with Brazil being injured, he is going to be a huge piece moving forward with him, Nick Smith Jr., and Anthony Black. Those three are going to have to put on some big performances down the stretch of the SEC conference and all the way into March for Arkansas to make a good run. Also, some other mentions for underrated players. We have Andre Jackson. I talked about him a lot. I made a UConn video talking about him a lot, but he just deserves so much recognition. He doesn't really light up the stat sheet, but he kind of does everything, and I think he is probably the most important piece to that UConn team. I could even argue he might be a more important piece than Sanogo down low there for the Huskies. Another one, this is my guy from West Virginia, Joe Toussaint. This guy is super underrated. He might be one of the best six men in the country. He is a pure hustle player. He gets a lot of buckets off the bench as well. Great defender. I love his game, and I've watched a lot of West Virginia basketball because I am a West Virginia fan. So you could say I'm a little bit biased towards this one because I've watched him play a lot. But Joe Toussaint, I want to give him a mention on this podcast. He deserves it. Great player. Another few, we have Sean Padula from Virginia Tech. This guy is only a sophomore, and he has been lighting it up there for VTech as well. And they are 10-1 on the season. Look out for the Hokies to come around March. I feel like the Hokies as a team are just kind of being underrated. So Sean Padula, their leading scorer, definitely deserves to be a mention on this list. And Dante Scott from Maryland is my last honorable mention. I know that they just got blown out bad by UCLA the other day, but I still wanted to give him a mention because he don't really want to define him by that one game. All season long, he has been a great piece, and in my opinion, the most important piece for this Maryland team, who have other really good players around him, but I think he might be the most important piece. So now let's move in to our next portion of the podcast, and this is where we're going to be talking a lot about the Power 6 conferences and which conference I believe to be the best in college basketball. And really, I think it is between three conferences for me, that being the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC conference. Let's go ahead and start with the Big 10 because I feel like the Big 10 is a tricky one because they seem like they have a lot of depth and a lot of good teams throughout that conference. But year after year, the Big 10 disappoints in March. So until they prove otherwise, I don't think that I could say the Big 10 is the best conference, even though right now it's looking like they might get the most bids to the NCAA tournament. But will they even have a Final Four team this year? I'm not so sure. So for me, I can't put the Big 10 as the best conference at this point. But let's go ahead and shout out some of these teams. So we got Purdue, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Maryland, Ohio State, Iowa, Michigan State, Michigan, and then that right there is 9 teams I believe will probably get a bid to the NCAA tournament. And then you have 2 teams that I think are bridge teams, being Rutgers and Penn State. So that's 11 teams that could potentially get a bid to the NCAA tournament out of 14. That's crazy depth right there for the Big 10 conference. But then they have 3 bottom dwellers, that being Northwestern, Minnesota, and Nebraska there. So I don't see any chance of them making the tournament, but I see probably 9 bids in the Big 10 conference. Now I want to talk about the SEC because the SEC, I believe, might have a case, but here is how I define the SEC conference for basketball. Very top heavy. They have a top heavy conference, and I believe the bottom of this conference really weighs them down whenever comparing them to other conferences that we will be discussing. So you have Alabama, you have Arkansas, 2 super good teams. Also, Kentucky and Tennessee. Those 4 right there are really what makes this top heavy. And this year, you can kind of throw Mississippi State in there for now. Are they going to be able to maintain this good play? I think so, because they have a new head coach this year. He has been doing some great things. They've only had 1 opponent score above 55 points on them this season, and they are still undefeated. So those 5 teams for me are really what make the SEC part of this discussion. You got Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So very top heavy. But then you look at the rest of the conference, and those are five probably for sure tournament teams. But then you have the iffy ones. You have Missouri and you have LSU. Missouri and LSU, I feel like, are probably going to be bridge teams. Missouri has a really good start to the season, but then they got blown out at home by Kansas. That didn't look good. I worry about them whenever they get into conference play, being able to put together a good enough season to make it. So I would consider them a bridge team, and also LSU. I think LSU, they also got off to a pretty good start so far this season. And with KJ Williams and them boys, they pretty much have Murray State's team from last year. But I think LSU and Missouri are kind of in that same category. But then you have some bottom dwellers. I mean, I don't really want to consider Florida, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss bottom dwellers necessarily. But those three, I don't really see making the tournament. I could see an argument for Texas A&M if they can turn things around this season. But so far, under Coach Buzz Williams there, it's not really looking like they're going to be a tournament team. And then you have the true bottom dwellers, which I think are Georgia and Vanderbilt and even South Carolina. They got Gigi Jackson there, the freshman. He's been playing really good, but I don't see them making the tournament as well. So I believe that the SEC is probably going to have 6 bids to the tournament if you include one of either LSU or Missouri making the tournament as a lower seed. But in my opinion, the best conference in college basketball is still the Big 12. When you look at the Big 12, there's not really any teams in the conference that weigh down the league. I mean, every single team in the conference at this point could still possibly make the NCAA tournament. Now, will they all make it? No. I think the Big 12 will probably get 7 or 8 bids out of 10 teams that they have there. But there's not a team in this conference that I'm like for sure they are not making the tournament, and they are weighing down this conference. I think every team in the Big 12 will be playing in the postseason this year, whether it's in the NCAA tournament, and the couple of teams that don't make it are probably going to be in the NIT because this conference is very, very stacked. You got Kansas, defending national champions, still top 10 in the country. They got some good wins over Duke this year, a blowout win over Missouri. They are still looking like a very solid team this year. You got Baylor. They got a big win over Gonzaga this season, and they have a star freshman in Keontae George running 3 guards. Him, Adam Flagler, LJ Cryer. They got a solid squad there in Baylor as always. And then you got Texas. And I know that the stuff is coming out there with Chris Beard, but they got a solid roster there. And even without Chris Beard, I still think that they are going to be a pretty high seed come March Madness and be able to make some noise there with Tyrese Hunter and Marcus Carr. That is one of the best backcourts in the country. And then Timmy Allen, he's starting to get some more touches. I think Timmy Allen needs more touches if this Texas team is going to be great. But then you have TCU. TCU there with Jamie Dixon has been lighting things up. Recently, they had the one bad loss early in the season, but they weren't healthy in that game. And I think TCU is really starting to turn things around as of late, and I really, really like the way that they have been playing. So TCU, definitely a tournament team in my eyes, and they could potentially, by the time we come around March, be a top 5 seed in the tournament. I mean, they are looking really good. They got a solid 5. It's not just it's not just their point guard Miles and Eddie Lampkin there. Eddie Lampkin probably isn't even the second best player on this TCU team. I mean, they got a really solid squad and a good bench as well. Then you got my squad, WVU. I think that we are going to be a tournament team this year. Only losses are to Purdue and Xavier on the road. And the way they play defensively, I mean, this is looking like a Bob Huggins team. I think they're going to be in the tournament as well. You have Iowa State. Iowa State has a good win over North Carolina. How good is that win looking now? I think it might look better as the season goes on once North Carolina gets into ACC play and picks up some more wins in conference. But Iowa State, I think they are a lower seed in the tournament. Could possibly miss out depending on their season goes because I'm not too high on them. I definitely think Iowa State has the potential to sizzle down once we get into Big 12 play. But then you have the teams that I am iffy on, teams that could make the tournament, but I'm not sold uh, on being able to make it. And that is Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, surprisingly, in this list on teams that I don't know if they're going to make the tournament this year. And then also Kansas State. But all four of those teams have potential to make the tournament. And I believe two of those teams probably will because the Big 12 is pretty stacked. I think 7 or 8 teams are getting into the tournament. And in my opinion, the Big 12 is still the best conference in basketball because of its depth that it has. I don't think that there's any team or teams that are really weighing this conference down just based on how bad they've been doing. Like the Big Ten, you have Northwestern, Minnesota, even Nebraska really weighing the conference down. The SEC, you got Georgia, you got Vanderbilt, you got South Carolina, you got Florida, who's having a disappointing year. You got Texas A&M, who's having a disappointing year up to this point. I think Missouri, when they get into conference, is probably going to sizzle down. I think they'll have a decent year. I don't think they're a tournament team. But yes, I definitely would go with the Big 12. But let's talk about the other three Power 6 conferences that really weren't in the conversation for me as far as being the best conference. I believe you can make a case for the Big 10, but the main thing that's dragging me down for them is the fact that they haven't been able to perform during the March Madness tournament, which is the most important time of the year in college basketball. So until they're able to do that, I'm not sold on them. And I'm looking at the top teams in the conference, and I'm not sure that the Big Ten is going to be able to have a team win the national championship or even make the Final Four. I think some of these teams have Final Four potential, but are they actually going to go in there and get it done? They're going to have to prove me wrong here before I trust in the Big Ten again, because the past few years, they've had top seeds in the tournament lose very, very early. But first, let's talk about the Big East Conference. The Big East Conference, as of right now, is being absolutely carried by UConn. I believe UConn is a national championship contender. You guys have probably heard me say that on this channel a few times, but they're looking really good. I'm super high on the Huskies this season. But after that, it was looking like Creighton might have some national championship potential as well early in the season, but that's whittled down a lot. I think they are now on a 4 or 5 game losing streak after losing to Arizona State. That's not looking good there for Creighton. Are they going to be able to turn it back around and become that team that we saw in the Maui tournament, beating Arkansas in a close battle with Arizona? Are they going to be able to get back to that? Because they have a solid squad, a great starting 5 there for the Blue Jays. So we'll see if they can turn it around come conference play, but I'm not so sure. It's not looking that great for Creighton. They had so much potential. To me, the second and third best team in the Big East right now, behind UConn, who is really carrying that conference, is Xavier and Marquette. I think Xavier and Marquette are going to be locks to make the tournament. I think Marquette's win over Baylor is going to carry them all the way into the tournament. Xavier has had some close losses, but they also have a good win over West Virginia. And also Cincinnati, a big rivalry game on the road. You can't discount that just because Cincinnati probably won't have that great of a season. That's still a good win for Xavier. Tough environment, rivalry game. I think that they are the next 2 best teams in the conference. And you got teams that I think at this point are bridge teams, like will they make the tournament? Will they not? They're pretty close. They're on the bubble. And that is right now Creighton. I think, they have the good win over Arkansas, but they have a lot of bad losses. I think they're a bubble team at this point. I would not, if the season ended today, I don't know if I'd put Creighton in the tournament. And it's crazy to say because they're so talented. And when you watch them play early in the year, you'd say, man, this team has potential to make a deep run in March Madness. But right now, I'd put them on the bubble. And same with St. John's, they had a good win over Syracuse, but then they went into Iowa State and lost that one pretty badly. So I'm a little bit iffy on St. John's. I think that they could potentially make the tournament. They're a bubble team for me. And also Butler. Butler has been a surprise team this year in the Big East. Look out for them. I could see them potentially being a bubble team and trying to sneak in this year. We got two more conferences to talk about. Let's go ahead and go to the ACC. So the ACC is kind of similar to the SEC for me, and that being that it's pretty top heavy. It's just not as just the teams that are top heavy for them aren't as good as the teams on top of the SEC. You have Virginia, who I believe is up there with the top teams of the SEC. It's probably better than anyone in the SEC, but Virginia is really holding up this conference, but also Duke. Duke has been pretty good this year. I think that they are yet to reach their max potential for this season. Some of their freshmen have not performed to the best of their ability, to the best of their talents yet. I think it's possible they could get going and be a big part of this team. You have North Carolina, who coming in was the national championship favorites coming into this season. They've been struggling as of late. I still think that they have potential to make a deep run in this year's tournament. You also have Miami and Virginia Tech, who I would also put in that top tier category at this point. Virginia Tech and Miami not being talked about very much at this point in the season, but putting together a really solid record through the non-conference. And I think they're going to beat up on these bottom teams in the ACC and be able to get decent seeds in the tournament. I really like this Virginia Tech team. They play with a lot of heart and they play hard. And Miami, they got a good squad there. They got some stars on that team who have been performing, and I'm actually pretty excited about this Miami team. I think that they will probably get a top 6 seed in the tournament. I think that that's pretty safe to say at this point. And then to me, you have your next tier in the ACC, which I would consider the bubble tier, like I have in the other conferences, and that includes Wake Forest, who has a good win over Wisconsin and has a star player on their team at point guard, and then also Notre Dame. Notre Dame has a good win over Michigan State. I don't know if they're quite going to make the tournament, but I think they're close to that bubble area for sure. You also have teams like Pitt and Syracuse, who I think could potentially be bubble teams this year. Pitt has really turned it around. I mean, it was looking like they were going to have another bad season under Coach Jeff Capel after they got blown out by West Virginia at home. But they've really turned it around. They blew out Northwestern on the road. They've been picking up some good wins, and I think that they're definitely going to be able to beat these bottom dweller teams in the ACC. They might have to I think they're probably, once they get into the ACC tournament, Pitt and also Syracuse, they're going to have to make a little bit of a run, get 2, maybe even 3 wins in the ACC tournament if they want to lock down a bid for March Madness. But then you have 3 really bad teams weighing down the ACC, and that is, of course, Louisville. Louisville has been terrible this year. They actually just got their first win, which was actually super surprising. I can't believe Florida State got a win, but then you got or LSU or Louisville, if I could talk, got a win. But then you have also Florida State, who only has a few wins. They have been a major disappointment at the preseason, I'm pretty sure most people would say, Florida State, I think they're probably going to have a bounce back year and at least be a bubble team to make the tournament after their rough season last year where they had a bunch of injuries. But the third team weighing down this conference is Boston College. I think Boston College is terrible this year. Just I'll leave it at that. Those three teams are really terrible, weighing down the ACC. And then our last conference to talk about here, we have the Pac-12 conference, and it's the same story every year here for the Pac-12. You have UCLA, you have Arizona, and then it's like, what else do you got for me? What else do you got for me? You got a few teams that will sneak into the tournament. We thought Oregon might be pretty good this year, but they're just not. They're not good this year. I don't think they're going to make the tournament for the second season in a row, which is surprising because they are a well-coached team there under Dana Altman, but they're not going to be in the tournament this year. I think it's pretty safe to say, unless they turn things around. But three teams, I believe, other than UCLA and Arizona, that could make the tournament out of the Pac-12. You have Arizona State, Utah, and also USC. I think those three teams could potentially sneak into the tournament. I think Arizona State for sure. I think that Creighton win is going to help them down the line for sure. And then you have Utah, who has a big win over Arizona early in the season. I think that could help carry them, sneak them into March, and be that big statement win that they've had that will take them off the bubble and put them in the tournament. And then USC, they got a decent squad there. I could see them being a lower seed as well. But other than that, I'm not seeing any teams, other teams in the Pac-12 that are going to be able to even be a bubble team. I don't even consider these teams bubble teams. I mean, you have Cal, who hasn't got a win yet. I don't know how their coach still has a job. You have Stanford, who's terrible. You have Oregon State, who's terrible. You have Washington State, not as bad, but still bad. Washington, who's gotten some decent wins this year, but I don't see them getting into the tournament, and same with Colorado. And then Oregon has been a big disappointment this year as well. I just don't think Washington is getting into the tournament, but if I had to pick another team, I would probably go with them, but I still don't believe in them either. So, next part of this podcast, we have, as we always do at the end of the podcast every week, we have my top 5 National Player of the Years contenders who I think should be the top 5 contenders at this point in the season, and then my top 3 National Championship contenders at this point in the season. And after we do that, I will take your guys' questions. So make sure you guys leave those in the live chat down below, and we will answer those after. If you guys are watching this later as a video, make sure you guys drop a like and hit that subscribe button. That lets me know you guys want to keep seeing these podcasts every single week on Thursday at 10 p.m. live. Of course, if you can't make it, you guys can always watch as a video after, but being in here live allows you to ask me some questions for the end of the podcast. So let's go ahead and get into my top 5 National Player of the Year contenders at this point in the season. At number 1, we have the same player that I've had at number 1 for the third week in a row, for the third episode of this podcast, and that is Zach Edey for Purdue. I think it's pretty hard to find a case for somebody else to be more worthy than Zach Edey up to this point in the season. I mean, Purdue is undefeated. A lot of people were saying during the preseason, Purdue's going to be having a down year. They lost Jaden Ivey. They lost Travion Williams. They're probably not going to do as good as they did last season. But Zach Edey has really been a force and has been a mismatch problem and has just been unstoppable. He's averaging 22 points per game, 14 boards per game, and shooting 61% from the field. That is outstanding. He's definitely the front runner for me to win the Player of the Year. At number 2, I actually have Azuolas Tubelis from Arizona. I think that this guy is being slept on as an AP Player of the Year contender. He's averaging 28-2, 60% from the field and 40% from behind the arc. And Arizona is one of the best teams in the country. They just got a big win over Indiana. They got a big win over Creighton when Creighton was at their peak start of the season. I think Arizona deserve. I think some people are sleeping on Arizona. I know most people will still have them in their top 10. I think I have them sitting there at 5 in my power rankings. Pretty high on Arizona, and Tubelis has been amazing. He's another mismatch problem. He's a 6'11" guy who is lighting it up from behind the 3-point line, and he's just killing it, man. And then at number 3, a guy who has been in my top 5 every single week, we have Jalen Wilson from Kansas. And Jalen Wilson is putting up outstanding numbers. The only thing with Jalen Wilson is his efficiency isn't as great, but he is taking a lot of shots. He is the number 1 option on that Kansas team. He's averaging 22 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and shooting 42% from the field. At number 4, I actually do have Drew Timme. And Drew Timme, along with Oscar Tshiebwe, are guys that are always in contention. They just put up outstanding numbers, and their teams are very consistently in the top 25 rankings. So it's hard to keep them off this list. But Drew Timme averaging 28-3, shooting 62% from the field. Crazy numbers. We all know how good Drew Timme is, and he's coming in at number 4 for me at this point in the season. And my number 5 is actually the first and only freshman on this list, and that is Brandon Miller for Alabama. I loved what I saw from Brandon Miller against Memphis, and he's led Alabama to be one of the top teams in the country at this point in the year. Their only losses against UConn. They have a big win over Houston. But against Memphis, I kept saying while I was watching that game, like, Quinterly is dribbling the ball out too much. Great things are happening when Brandon Miller is touching the ball and it's getting moved around there. So I really like what I'm seeing from Brandon Miller, and also in that Memphis game, he was the closer on that team, and it is so valuable to have a player who can close out a game for you. And at such a young age, as a freshman, Brandon Miller is doing that. He's averaging 18 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, and shooting 43% from behind the 3-point line. Another guy who is a tall forward, mismatch problem. He can put it down on the dribble, take you on the drive. Solid player there. So those are my top 5 Player of the Year contenders at this point. Some honorable mentions. Of course, I got to throw Tshiebwe's name out there. Kentucky is starting to turn up a little bit, and he didn't play the first few games of the season, but Oscar Tshiebwe is coming. He's trying to get that back-to-back. So look for him to creep up this list as the season goes on if he keeps putting up some ridiculous numbers. But let's get into my top 3 championship contenders at this point in the season. And we have one team that's a little bit switched up from last week. So a team that I'm starting to get more and more high on each time I'm watching them play. If you guys want to go ahead and drop your questions for me down in the chat, I will get to those as soon as we are done with my championship contenders. So my number 1 championship contender at this point in the season is the same as last week, and that is the UConn Huskies. I really like this UConn Huskies team. You guys have heard me talk about them time and time again. Crazy depth, a good center in Sonogo, a good backup center as well, who's 7'1". Andre Jackson is a do-it-all guy. He understands his role, and he is a star player in his role. You got good guards there with Tristan Newton lighting it up as well. UConn, for me, is the number 1 championship contender at this point in the season. My number 2 is the Virginia Cavaliers. I think they were number 3 last week, but they're moved up to number 2 now. coached by Tony Bennett. He's won a national championship before, and he's really got a squad that is ready to play some Tony Bennett basketball. They move it around a lot. I love Reese Beekman's game. Reese Beekman is a two-way star. He can get it done offensively, and he's one of the best defenders in the country. I really like what I see from Reese Beekman there at Virginia. They also have a really good bench as well, which is going to be important. As you can tell, I had UConn as my number one, so I value the bench a lot. Virginia is my number two, and we have a new number three on this list, and that is the Arizona Wildcats. The Arizona Wildcats are my third national championship contender at this point in the season, and I'm just loving the way they're playing. And they're another team. They lost Benedict Mathurin after last season, and people thought, are they going to be as good? But Turbellis has really taken that star spot. They got a good center there in Ballo. They got good guards there in Krista and the transfer from Texas there as well. And Courtney Ramey, but I'm really liking what I'm seeing from this Arizona team. They're coming in at number 3 this week, new number 3 for my top championship contenders for this season. I do have a quick honorable mention in Purdue. They were my number 2 last week. They've fallen off this list. I just don't know if they're going to be able to get it done in March and win the national championship. They do have an unstoppable force and Zach Edey, but I think the surrounding cast or surrounding players there around him are, they're really good players and they have a good bench. They're at Purdue, but I'm not sure how consistent they're going to be down the stretch. I worry about Purdue when we get to March, and I have those 3 teams ahead of Purdue at this point. So that is going to wrap it up. Be sure to let me know your guys' questions for the last part of this podcast down in the chat, and I will answer them here in the podcast. Say UConn is going to run into a buzzsaw and Shaka Smart will beat them. Yeah, I could definitely see UConn getting a few losses this year during the regular season. Maybe to Marquette, maybe to Xavier, maybe even Creighton if they start to heat back up. But I still think that UConn is probably going to be a top seed in this tournament, maybe even the top overall seed in this tournament. I mean, if they can win the Big East Conference regular season and in the tournament and only come out of there with a couple of losses, like 2 or 3, I think that UConn will probably be the top overall seed or definitely a 1 seed come March Madness. I just don't see many teams being able to stop UConn at this point. That's why I have them as my number 1 national championship contender at this point in the season. I'm just super high on the Huskies, man. We got one coming in here from Nonstop Sports Kids. He says he thinks Oscar will be the player of the year once again. He is just heating up after that injury. And that's what I kind of mentioned. That's why I gave him an honorable mention. He was injured at the start of the season, but Kentucky's starting to heat things up really fast. They got UCLA this Saturday. That's going to be a huge game, especially considering UCLA just got a big win, blowout win on the road against Maryland. So that will look like a really good win for Kentucky. And if Oscar can dominate in that game, which he probably will, he's been putting up outstanding numbers once again. I could definitely see him getting back into contention to winning back-to-back AP Player of the Years. Any more questions in the chat? drop them. If not, we will wrap up the podcast for this week. While we wait for some more questions, if any, I will go ahead and remind you guys we will be live again Saturday night around 10 p.m. and we will be watching Tennessee versus Arizona as kind of a watch party stream, but also as a recap stream, recapping all the big games that went down on Saturday because there are a ton and it's really going to shake things up. Also, on Monday morning, we always have our power rankings out. And tomorrow on Friday, we are going to have our predictions for those big games on Saturday out tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout for all those videos coming to you very soon. And of course, as always, we will be live again next Thursday with some more videos throughout the week before Thursday. But we'll be live again for the podcast next week on Thursday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. So we got one coming in here from Trey. He says, does WVU get ranked assuming they win 4 straight heading into Morgantown versus Kansas? Heading into Morgantown versus Kansas. Yes, I think West Virginia would be ranked if we are able. I know we have 2 not so tough games against Buffalo and against Stony Brook. Those should be very easy wins for West Virginia. But then if we can get 2 road wins in league play against Kansas State and against Oklahoma State, I think that they will be ranked heading into Kansas coming into town. And honestly, I don't think that that's not – I don't think – it's not a winnable game for West Virginia with Kansas coming to town. I think between Kansas and Baylor coming to town, back-to-back games, West Virginia is definitely winning one of those games. And I could definitely see it being Kansas or Baylor. And winning one of those games will definitely keep West Virginia ranked after winning 4 straight heading into that Kansas game. So I like that question. Of course, I am a West Virginia fan, hoping that they will be ranked after hopefully a 4-game win streak. Another one coming in here from Sports Kids. He says, do you think Duke could be a second-round exit this year? And short answer, yes. I mean, I think that anyone can be upset by any team. I mean, we saw St. Peter's last year go on a big run. But I do see some holes in this Duke team this year. I think they're led by Jeremy Roach. But honestly, I definitely see some holes. You know, they got Tyrese Proctor, Cal Flapowski, who have been really good freshmen on that team. I think Derek Whitehead is starting to show some potential, but still Derek Lively, he hasn't been showing that yet. And I could definitely see Duke losing in the second round this year. Say they're a 3 seed, I could for sure see them losing in the second round to a 6 seed. I think that's not too far fetched because there will be some really good 6 seeds this year. So yeah, I could definitely see Duke losing in the second round. Next question, we got another one here from Trey. He says, Vardas Imac has left Texas Tech in the transfer portal. Yes, we talked about that briefly at the start of the podcast. The main reason that's coming out there in the news sources is because he's had that foot injury, the broken foot, since the preseason. He was expected back around February to play, but he's feeling like he's being rushed back by Texas Tech, and that's the main reason he's entering the transfer portal. So we'll have to keep an eye out on that. A big name already in the portal, and we're only in December. We got another one coming in here from Sports Kids. If you guys have any other questions, drop them. I will take a few more, and then we will end episode 3 of the Danny Hoops podcast. So He says, where do you think Kentucky gets this year? So I guess how far do I think Kentucky gets, or what seed do I think they'll get? I'll kind of answer both. So I think Kentucky's going to kind of turn up here in the SEC. They should be able to dominate most of the bottom teams in the SEC and pick up some good wins. I could see them beating Tennessee, Alabama, and Arkansas this season. Like, I could see those are all winnable games for Kentucky. They have a talented roster. So I think Kentucky gets up to a 3 or 4 seed come March. But if they really dominate, I could even see them skyrocket up to like a 2 seed. So if I had to make a prediction right now, I would probably say a 3 or a 4 seed for Kentucky. And I see them making it to around the Sweet 16 this season. I don't really see them getting to a Final Four push. But I think I would predict Kentucky to make it to the Sweet 16, maybe the Elite Eight, given the right matchups. So that is going to do it for episode 3 of the Danny Hoops podcast. If you guys are watching this as a video after, make sure you guys like and subscribe. And if you want to, join us next Thursday night at 10 p.m. live, and you guys can ask your questions at the end of the stream. So thank you guys, everyone in the live chat watching this one on Thursday night. I appreciate all you guys, and I appreciate all you guys watching as a video. We hit 2,000 subscribers a couple of days ago on stream, and super thankful for that. And we're already up to 2,020 subscribers now. So we're starting to grow really fast, building an awesome college basketball community here on the channel. We're going to keep coming with the podcast, going to keep coming with the streams and the content for you guys. I hope you guys continue to enjoy it. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching the podcast. I'm out.